Good evening from a village where gossip travels faster than the post. I wonder, from which part of the world are you joining us today? We do love hearing from our listeners near and far. And don't forget to subscribe, so you'll never miss when the next bit of mischief blooms. It was the sort of Cotswold afternoon that seemed to have been washed twice and hung out damp. A thin drizzle clung to Carsley's rooftops, flattening the smoke from the chimneys and lending every conversation a faintly apologetic tone. Agatha Raisin stood at her cottage gate in a new tweed coat that smelt disconcertingly of mothballs and determination. "Heritage," she muttered, locking the door with a snap. "That's what they all bang on about. Well, I can be heritage if I have to be." Charles Fraith lounged against his car at the lane's end, umbrella slanted rakishly. "My dear, you already are heritage, priceless, and occasionally cracked." "Mock if you like," said Agatha, climbing in beside him, "but the whole village is going to Mirabel Crossing for that train ceremony. It wouldn't do for me to appear indifferent." "Indifferent or dry?" Charles tilted the umbrella over her lap. "Both," she said grimly. "I've brought sherry." She produced a tartan thermos like a trophy. By the time they reached the little branch line station, twilight had lowered itself over the hills. The platform lamps shone like small moons in the mist. A brass band was tuning itself into despair near the ticket office, while the Historical Society milled about, luminous with self-importance. Clive Brant, the Society's chairman, was in full oratorical bloom beside a banner reading "Farewell to Steam, a Glorious Century." His tall frame radiated pomp. His wife Lydia, in dove-grey wool and pearls, smiled as if the whole thing were her idea. Nearby stood Trevor Mott, a wiry man with a nicotine moustache and a scowl one shade darker than his overcoat. "That'll be the feud," whispered Charles. "They've been fighting over who owns the original station bell. Thrilling stuff." Agatha scanned the small crowd. The station master, Mr. Hinchley, was fussing over a valve on the ancient engine Queen Matilda, muttering about safety inspectors. Children waved little flags. The air smelled of coal, wet wool, and optimism. Clive raised his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, this evening marks not an ending but a beginning, the preservation of our proud railway spirit." "Translation," murmured Charles. "He's angling for council funding." Agatha's lips twitched. "You're just jealous of his projection." The band struck up Rule Britannia, valiant but flat. Rain drummed lightly on the canopy. Through the din, Agatha noticed Lydia's gloved hand close tightly around her husband's sleeve. Across the tracks, Trevor Mott lit a cigarette and blew smoke in deliberate provocation. "Do you think they'd murder each other over a brass bell?" asked Charles. "In this village they'd murder for less," said Agatha. At 5:30, the whistle shrieked. Steam rolled along the platform, blurring faces into ghosts. Agatha felt an odd prickling at the back of her neck, the same sensation she'd had before every ridiculous adventure she'd ever stumbled into. The engine groaned forward, cheered by umbrellas. Clive Brant climbed aboard with theatrical waves. Lydia dabbed her eyes for the cameras from the Evesham Echo. Behind them, the guard's van door slammed, and for a heartbeat Agatha saw a shadowy movement inside. 2 figures, one gesturing sharply. Then the train moved off into the fog. "Well," said Charles, taking a swig from the thermos, "that's that. Shall we celebrate the death of steam with gin?" "Don't tempt me," said Agatha. "I'm trying to look respectable." They joined the exodus to the car park. Clive's speech still echoed in the damp air, promising that the train would return at 8 o'clock for the final salute. Lydia lingered, receiving condolences for the end of an era, as though she'd been widowed by progress. Agatha, feeling vaguely envious of such poise, offered a brisk handshake. "Lovely evening, Mrs. Brant. Your husband did the society proud." "He does everything proud," Lydia replied, eyes sliding away. "Excuse me." She crossed the platform quickly toward the signal hut, her heels clicking like punctuation marks. Charles leaned close. "Domestic frost alert." Agatha watched her disappear into the mist. Something in Lydia's rigid back suggested anger rather than grief. But perhaps that was just marriage. Agatha had seen enough to know the difference between affection and habit. They drove home through lanes glistening with puddles, headlights carving tunnels in the fog. Agatha felt unusually thoughtful. "Do you ever miss excitement?" she asked. "Constantly," said Charles. "That's why I spend time with you." She pretended not to smile. I mean real excitement, danger, mystery. You call in plumbers as though they were murder suspects, he said mildly. When they reached Carsely, the village was already snug behind curtains. Agatha stood in her hall, hanging up the damp tweed, feeling both pleased with herself for supporting local culture and faintly cheated that nothing scandalous had happened. She poured a proper sherry this time and settled by the fire with the evening paper. The drizzle thickened to rain, tapping against the window panes in small, insistent rhythms. Somewhere in the distance a train whistle sounded, a long, lonely note swallowed by the wind. Last run, she murmured. Good riddance to nostalgia. Yet sleep would not come easily. At midnight she gave up and padded downstairs, drawn by a vague unease. The radio muttered low news about budget debates, no mention of Mirabel Crossing. She tried to laugh at herself, imagining murders where there were none, but the sound died in the empty room. In the morning the telephone rang before breakfast. "Mrs. Raisin?" came Bill Wong's steady voice. "Sorry to disturb you. I thought you should know. There's been an incident at Mirabel Crossing." Agatha straightened, heart kicking. "What sort of incident?" "The train came back sometime after dawn," he said. "No crew aboard. Handbrake set. Clive Brant's missing." Her sherry glass from the night before still stood on the mantel, a faint ring beneath it. She stared at it as though it might answer for her. "Missing?" she repeated. "He's hardly the type to vanish. Too fond of applause." "Perhaps," said Bill. "We're checking the line. If you were there last night—" "Of course I was," she said, indignant. "Supporting heritage. Ask anyone." "Then perhaps you can come down and tell us what you saw." When she put down the receiver, the room seemed to contract. A faint chill threaded through the air despite the fire. Charles arrived 5 minutes later, newspaper in hand. "You've heard. The train's gone rogue." "So has Clive Brant," said Agatha. "Typical man. Can't even make an exit without turning it into a spectacle." She pulled on her boots, already composing the questions she would ask, the details she would notice before the police trampled them flat. Beneath the irritation, a small thrill stirred. The world had tilted toward intrigue again, and Agatha Raisin, however she protested, was happiest slightly off balance. As she stepped outside, the rain eased. A weak sun slid through the clouds, lighting the wet hedges so they glistened like lines of silver. Somewhere beyond the hills the empty train waited, and with it the truth, still steaming faintly in the cold morning air. Morning had the bleary pallor of tea brewed twice. Mist clung to the hedgerows like gossip reluctant to disperse. Agatha Raisin, fortified by 2 cups of strong coffee and a sense of purpose that felt pleasantly dramatic, directed Charles's car through the winding lanes toward Mirabel Crossing. "You realize," Charles said, "we're not technically invited to this investigation." "Nonsense, Ditas," said Agatha. "I was there. I'm practically a witness." "Practically," he murmured, as though it were a contagious condition. When they reached the small station, it looked nothing like the cheerful scene of the night before. Police tape fluttered in the wind, a bright yellow scolding across the entrance. The old engine sat sullenly on the main track, hissing occasional spurts of steam, as if resentful at being questioned. Officers in waterproofs moved briskly about, clipboards and radios creating a low, efficient hum. Agatha stepped out, tugging her coat tighter against the drizzle. "Well," she declared, "it's all very Agatha Christie, isn't it?" "Except you're named Agatha and she's dead," said Charles. "Don't be tiresome." Detective Inspector Bill Wong appeared from behind the signal box, expression half weary, half resigned. "I should have known you'd turn up." "Turn up?" said Agatha, affronted. "I was summoned." Bill gave her a look that balanced affection and exasperation. "Right. Summoned. Stay behind the tape, please. And no poking about." Agatha, of course, took that as permission to lean forward as far as decency allowed. From her vantage, she saw a dark smear along the step of the guard's van, oil perhaps or grease, and a crumpled timetable near the wheels. The air carried the faint tang of something oddly refined. "Aftershave," she said. "Clive Brant's. He always smelled like ambition." Bill suppressed a smile. "You noticed that last night, did you?" "I notice everything," she said primly. Charles coughed. "Except when people are trying to tell you not to interfere." Lydia Brant stood a few feet away under a borrowed police umbrella, the picture of fragile dignity. Her eyes were red, though Agatha suspected more from irritation than grief. A constable offered her tea from a flask, which she declined with a tragic shake of the head. He would never abandon the society's finances, Lydia said to anyone within hearing distance. He was honour itself. Agatha couldn't resist. Perhaps he simply ran off with the donations. Honour's expensive these days. Lydia turned, expression brittle. Unlike gossip, Mrs. Raisin, which is always cheap. Bill interjected smoothly, ushering Agatha aside. Please let us handle this, all right? So far we've got a train that rolled back on its own, brakes engaged and no driver. The guard's van door was unlatched, that's all. And Clive Brant? Missing. Dead, you mean? Missing, he repeated firmly. Agatha studied his face. You don't believe that. What I believe, said Bill, is that if I let you anywhere near that engine, we'll have another missing person. The press had arrived by then, local reporters eager to photograph tragedy before it turned dull. A young woman with a notepad intercepted Agatha. You were here last night, weren't you? Do you think this could be sabotage, or perhaps a lover's quarrel gone wrong? Certainly not, said Agatha, chin lifting. This is a quiet village. People here wouldn't stoop to that sort of thing. You live in the next village, don't you? Exactly, said Agatha, sweeping past. Behind her, Charles muttered, You do realise you just implied Carsely would stoop to it. If the shoe fits, she said, secretly pleased with herself. By mid-morning the drizzle had thickened into rain. The brass bands bunting from the night before drooped from the canopy, colours bleeding. Villagers gathered at the barriers, whispering theories with relish. One swore she'd seen Clive board the train with a suitcase. Another insisted he'd been spotted arguing with the station master over unpaid rent. A third claimed the ghost of a railwayman cursed the line. Agatha, listening, found her patience fraying. Embezzlement, adultery, hauntings, it's like a menu for idiots. You've just described your average murder inquiry, said Charles, taking a discreet sip from his hip flask. Bill approached again, rein on his shoulders. All right, Mrs. Raisin. If you must know, we found no sign of struggle. Brant's briefcase isn't here, neither's his wallet. Until we find either, it's officially a missing person. Perhaps he jumped off between stations. Possible, Bill admitted. Unlikely. The line's fenced most of the way. Unless he had help, said Agatha. Someone could have arranged to meet him, make it look like an accident. Bill sighed. You should really consider joining the force. You'd double the paperwork overnight. Flattery will get you nowhere, said Agatha, though she smiled inwardly. Lydia, meanwhile, had produced a handkerchief of delicate lace, dabbing at eyes that refused to cry. My husband adored that train, she said faintly. He said it was a symbol of tradition. He would never— Her breath hitched. He would never leave it. Maybe it left him, Charles murmured. Agatha gave him a warning glance but couldn't suppress a flicker of amusement. Lydia's dramatics were exhausting, yet there was a sliver of genuine confusion behind them. Bill closed his notebook. We'll need statements from both of you later. You'll have them, said Agatha. And for what it's worth, I think your man's been murdered. It's the only thing that would make Lydia that quiet. Bill looked skyward as though appealing for divine patience. By lunchtime, the reporters had retreated to the pub, and the police were packing up for a forensic sweep. Agatha and Charles lingered by the car, reluctant to leave the scene just yet. If he did run off, said Charles, where would he go? Foreign climes, fatter bank accounts. Men like Clive don't run off, said Agatha. They strut off. There's a difference. And yet, he's nowhere to be found. She frowned, glancing back at the silent train. The condensation on the carriage windows had begun to fade, leaving only ghostly handprints. Whether they were from the investigators or something else, she couldn't tell. A young porter in a soaked uniform approached them, nervously glancing about before speaking. Mrs. Raisin, you didn't hear this from me, right? You've already said too much, said Charles. Hush, said Agatha. Go on, dear. The porter leaned closer. Someone bought a one-way ticket to London Paddington last night. Name of Clive Brant. 7 o'clock train. I remember because he paid cash, and because he'd already gone up the line on the last run. Didn't make sense. Agatha's eyes sharpened. You're certain of the time? Positive. Ticket office closed right after. Did anyone else see him? Not that I know of, but the record's still in the till. Agatha straightened, pulse quickening. Thank you. You've been very helpful. If anyone asks, we were never here. The porter nodded nervously and scuttled away. Charles exhaled. So, he could have staged his own disappearance. How terribly dull. Or someone could have staged it for him, said Agatha. Her gaze lingered on the empty track, the soft plume of steam dissolving into rain. One-way ticket, my foot. He didn't buy Escape, he bought a cover story. Charles studied her. And what will you do with that theory? Prove it, said Agatha, lifting her chin. Find the body, or the blackguard, he groaned. Whichever turns up first, I suppose. Naturally, she said, then softer. You think I'm enjoying this, don't you? A little, he said. Agatha didn't deny it. Beneath the irritation and the drizzle and the absurdity of yet another village scandal, she felt the familiar thrum of purpose. Perhaps it was vanity, or restlessness, or that unspoken need to be seen doing something that mattered. But as she turned toward the car, the faint smell of Clive's aftershave drifted again on the wind, sharp and unmistakable. He's not gone far, she murmured. Men like that never do. The rain eased to a whisper. Somewhere down the line a lone whistle sounded, thin, fading, unanswered. The next morning broke sharp and bright, as though the weather had decided to wash its hands of yesterday's tragedy. Frost still silvered the edges of Agatha's garden, and a thin curl of chimney smoke promised warmth she didn't feel. She stood at her window, stirring her tea with unnecessary force, reading the Evesham Echo's headline, Railway Mystery Deepens, Local Historian Missing. Beneath it, a rather unflattering photograph of her own face peered out, caught mid-blink beside the train. Honestly, she muttered, they make me look like a startled mole. Mrs. Bloxby, who had dropped by with scones for comfort, sat in the armchair opposite. It's a terrible business, she said gently. Poor Mrs. Brant must be beside herself. She's beside something, said Agatha darkly. I've never trusted people who dab perfume over their grief. Mrs. Bloxby smiled faintly. Curiosity isn't the same as compassion, Agatha. Compassion's overrated when people are lying. You think she is? I think she's too polished. Women like Lydia Brant don't crumble, they calculate. Mrs. Bloxby folded her hands, serene as ever. Even so, perhaps it's best not to stir things unnecessarily. Agatha eyed her friend affectionately. If I didn't stir things, this village would congeal. By midday, Carsely was humming with speculation. In the shop queue, 2 women whispered that Clive Brant had been seen on the Oxford train. At the post office, someone else claimed he'd absconded to Mallorca. Each version grew more elaborate by the hour, embroidered with infidelity and foreign bank accounts. If gossip were horsepower, said Agatha, locking her cottage door, this village could pull the Orient Express. She headed to the Red Lion, the social furnace where rumours were forged into conviction. The low-beamed room smelled of ale and damp wool, packed with villagers nursing the thrill of scandal. Trevor Mott, the self-styled railway historian, sat by the bar with a pint and a captive audience. His thin moustache bristled with authority. I told Brant the Society's signal lamps were worth thousands, he was saying. And what does he do? Tries to flog them to a private collector in Cheltenham. Said it was for restoration funds, but I know a scheme when I see one. You've got proof? Someone asked. Proof? Proof's for the unimaginative, said Trevor, sipping with satisfaction. Agatha slid onto the stool beside him. Funny, she said. I thought you were his friend. He jumped slightly. Mrs. Raisin? Didn't see you there. You didn't see a lot of things, apparently, like who hit Clive over the head, if that's what happened. A murmur rippled around the bar. Trevor flushed. I never said he was dead. Not yet, said Agatha, but you're rehearsing nicely. Laughter flickered, quickly stifled as Bill Wong's shadow crossed the doorway. The constable at his side ordered tea. Bill ordered patience. Agatha, he said mildly, I'd appreciate it if you refrained from conducting public inquests. I'm just collecting observations, she said, from the bottom of a pint glass. Sometimes that's where the truth hides. Before Bill could reply, the pub door swung open again. A gust of perfume and London confidence swept in. Roy Silver. Darling, he cried, spotting Agatha, you look divine in local tragedy. I'm here on assignment. You're here for attention, said Agatha. Roy brushed an imaginary speck from his tailored sleeve. Both can be true. I'm managing PR for the Historical Society's crisis. Lydia begged me to craft a narrative of resilience. I may need your quote for the press release. Something gritty, yet redemptive. Try shove off, short and redemptive. Roy pouted, unoffended. Honestly, Aggie, you should thank me. Every mystery needs a glamorous witness. You're practically the Cotswold Miss Marple. If you call me that again, I'll commit an actual murder. Bill's lips twitched. Do carry on, he said, retreating to a corner table. Agatha ignored him, focusing instead on a new voice from the next booth. A woman she didn't recognize, elegant, early 30s, silk scarf and real pearls, was speaking to the barman. I only met Mr. Brandt once, she said in an accent that placed her firmly in the estate agent class. He showed me a parcel of land behind the old goods yard, said it was a quiet opportunity, whatever that means. He hinted it might soon be for sale, though strictly off record, of course. Agatha pricked up her ears. Off record? She repeated, turning. The woman blinked. Oh, Saskia Dunn, property management. You must be Mrs. Raisin. I read your name in the paper. Terribly exciting. Well, awful, obviously, but exciting. Do go on, said Agatha. What sort of land? About 2 acres, unregistered. Apparently part of the old railway allotment, but it's not on the deeds. Someone powerful wanted it handled quietly. Powerful? Agatha echoed. He didn't say who, just hinted it could change the face of the village. I thought it sounded rather sinister, but then most rural developments are. Agatha's pulse quickened. Greed, not romance, that was the motive that stuck. Land, money, self-importance, it fit perfectly. Charles, who had materialized at her elbow with his usual impeccable timing, murmured, Careful, darling, that gleam in your eye is visible from space. Don't be ridiculous. I'm merely deducing. You're deducing with the enthusiasm of a terrier near a rabbit hole. Agatha ignored him, addressing Saskia. And you never heard from Brandt again? No, I assumed the sale fell through. Such a pity. Quaint place, full of potential. For what? A luxury housing estate? Saskia's smile was professional. Something like that. Bill, overhearing, approached again. Mrs. Raisin, if you've finished interviewing witnesses, I need a word. He drew her aside. Leave Saskia Dunn alone. We've already spoken to her. And she's legitimate. No criminal record, no connection to Brandt beyond business. That's what she told you, said Agatha. Yes, said Bill patiently. That's why we asked. She gave him a bright smile. You're such a dear boy, Bill, always trusting the paperwork, but villains don't fill out forms. He sighed. Just don't interfere. Interfere? I'm offering moral support. You're offering chaos, he said, walking off. As dusk settled, the pub thinned. Roy was regaling a group of pensioners with tales of London journalism. Charles was chatting up Saskia under the guise of research. Agatha finished her second sherry, pondering everything she'd heard. The lamps, the land, the lies. If Clive Brandt had planned to sell railway antiques and secret property, someone had plenty to lose, or gain. On her way out, she caught Trevor muttering to another regular. She thinks she's Poirot, that one. Knows in everything. Agatha turned sweetly. Yes, and if I were Poirot, you'd already be in handcuffs. The laughter that followed was genuine, if nervous. Outside, the air had turned raw. She walked home through puddled lanes, the moon slicing through scudding clouds. Behind her, the Red Lion's windows glowed like gossip in physical form, warm, bright, and full of smoke. Back at her cottage, she locked the door, switched off the lamps, and stood a moment by the window. The village lay hushed except for the occasional car or the bark of a distant dog. Then she saw it, a faint flicker of light at the far edge of the field, beyond the hedgerow, the old signal house, a lantern moving slowly inside. Agatha's breath caught. The police had sealed that place. No one should be there. For a long moment, she watched the glow waver, vanish, then return, like someone pacing. Bill won't believe me, she murmured. Charles will think I'm imagining things, which means... She reached for her coat, heart already thudding with the reckless pleasure of disobedience. Outside, the night swallowed her shape as she started down the lane toward Mirabel Crossing, the air damp and expectant, as though the countryside itself were holding its breath. The night pressed close around the hedgerows, thick with damp and the faint smell of soil and rust. Agatha Raisin's boots squelched softly as she crept down the lane toward the station, her torch beam darting like a guilty conscience. Behind her, Charles Fraith muttered something about her being mad and his shoes being Italian. You didn't have to come, she whispered. I most certainly did, he replied. If you're found lurking by police tape alone, they'll lock you up for lunacy. If I'm here, it looks like poor judgment instead. The signal house loomed ahead, a squat brick building with a corrugated roof half swallowed by ivy. Through one grimy window flickered that same lantern light she'd seen from her cottage. It moved irregularly, as though someone, or something, were pacing inside. Agatha's heart gave an odd, traitorous leap. Curiosity, excitement, and fear were always tangled threads in her nature. "We'll look through the window first," she whispered. "Or," said Charles, "we could go home, call Bill, and let people with official torches deal with it." Agatha ignored him. She crouched near the window, wiping away condensation with her sleeve. The glass smeared, revealing the dim shape of a man hunched over a table, a lantern casting a wavering glow beside him. His hand moved slowly, writing or drawing something on a scrap of paper. "Who is it?" Charles breathed. "Trevor Mott," she said. "The railway fellow. I recognize that ridiculous coat." "Then why the midnight industry?" "Let's find out." The door creaked open under her push, unlatched. Inside, the air smelled of metal, coal dust, and damp wool. "Trevor?" she called softly. No reply. She stepped forward, the beam of her torch cutting across the small room. The lantern guttered low, and then she saw him. Trevor Mott sat slumped over the table, head bent at an impossible angle, the back of his skull dark with blood. A heavy spanner lay on the floor, slick and glinting. The air was heavy with silence. Agatha froze. For once, even Charles said nothing. "He's dead," she murmured. "Well deduced," Charles said faintly. "Can we leave now before we join him?" But Agatha's eyes had fixed on the paper beneath the lantern. A torn section of a railway timetable lay beside the body, the edges smudged. On it, circled in red pencil, were the words, "Paddington, 700 p.m." And something else, an odour that didn't belong to the place at all. Soft, floral, expensive. "Lilac," she said. "Lydia Brandt's perfume." Charles sniffed. "Could be anyone's." "It's hers. She smells like a florist on overdraft." He made a sound halfway between a groan and a laugh. "You're extraordinary." Agatha leaned closer, careful not to touch anything. "He's been dead for hours," she said. "Look, the lantern's nearly out. Whoever killed him wanted to meet him here, probably to talk about the train or the antiques, and things went wrong." "Yes, but things always go wrong around you," Charles pointed out. "Don't start," said Agatha. She backed away, hand trembling slightly. Her thrill of discovery gave way to unease, the awareness that she was now part of the scene, fingerprints or not. "We should ring Bill," she said reluctantly. At last, reason triumphs. 10 minutes later, the quiet lane blazed with blue lights. Officers surrounded the building, and Bill Wong's face, drawn and unsmiling, appeared through the mist. "For heaven's sake, Agatha," he said, "do you have an allergy to caution?" "We were just walking," she began. "Walking," Bill repeated, glancing at her mud-splattered boots, "through restricted property at midnight to a building that's been sealed off." "Technically," said Charles, "it wasn't sealed. The door was unlocked." "Because the murderer came through it," said Bill, "not as an invitation for you two." Agatha folded her arms. "I found him, didn't I? You should be thanking me." Bill rubbed his forehead. "You've contaminated a crime scene." "Only slightly," said Agatha. The forensic team swarmed around them. Flash cameras popped, voices murmured. An officer retrieved the spanner, another bagged the timetable. "Anything else?" Bill asked. "A smell of perfume," said Agatha. He raised an eyebrow. "Perfume?" "Lilac. Lydia Brandt wears it. And don't roll your eyes. My sense of smell's impeccable." "Your sense of drama certainly is," said Charles. Bill ignored him, noting something in his book. "We'll question her again. She claimed she was home with flu." "Then she's miraculously recovered," said Agatha. Bill gave her a steady look. "And how do you know that?" "I saw her today, perfectly healthy, buying flowers. Lilacs, incidentally." Charles sighed. "Oh, here we go." The coroner's van arrived, shattering the fragile quiet. Trevor Mott's body was lifted away, and Agatha felt an unexpected pang. She hadn't liked him, but death always punctured vanity. It reminded her how fragile her own pretensions were. "Any sign of Brandt?" she asked softly. "Nothing yet," said Bill. "But now we've got a direct connection. Mott accused Brandt of selling society property. Maybe he confronted him." "Or maybe someone else wanted to shut him up," said Agatha. "Leave it, Aggie," said Bill wearily. "This is police work now." "You said that last time, and look how that went." "Yes," he said. We caught the killer despite you." Agatha scowled. By morning the story was everywhere. Body found in historic station, police probe society feud. The photo showed Bill beside the train, expressions serious and efficient. The caption praised D.I. Wong's meticulous police work. Agatha nearly choked on her toast. "Meticulous police work," she told Charles over the phone. "If I hadn't gone out there, they'd still be scratching their heads. And if you hadn't gone out there, you wouldn't be in the papers again." "Exactly. I deserve credit, not headlines making me look like a lunatic." Charles's laugh purred down the line. "The universe is perverse, darling. It rewards the dull." "You're one to talk." "Touché." She hung up and sat back, glaring at the newspaper. Outside, the morning was clean and sharp, birds whistling obliviously. Somewhere among them fluttered her pride, dented but unbroken. At noon, Bill arrived, notebook in hand. "I suppose you've come to apologize," she said. "For what?" "For doubting my instincts." "Your instincts nearly got you arrested," said Bill. "But yes, you were right about the perfume. Forensics found traces near the table, and a timetable with Paddington marked in red." "So Clive Brandt again?" "Looks that way." Agatha felt vindicated. "You'll have to re-interview Lydia." "We already did. She insists she never left home." "Of course she does. Women with perfect hair always lie about their whereabouts." Bill sighed. "You and your theories." "And yet they're always right." "Not always," he said, flipping his notebook closed. "Oh, and one more thing. We found something under Mott's body, a railway ticket stub." "To Paddington?" "Yes. Oddly enough, it has initials on the back. A.R. in ink. Your style of handwriting, actually." Agatha stared. "That's ridiculous. I haven't been near a ticket." "It was under him, Agatha." For once, words failed her. "Someone's setting me up," she said finally. "Or you dropped it," said Bill, though his tone held no conviction. "Either way, keep out of it until we sort this, please." "You think I'd leave my own initials on a body? I'm not stupid." "No," he said quietly. "But whoever planted it thinks you're noticeable enough to make good headlines." That silenced her. After he left, Agatha sat by the window, watching sunlight dance over the frosted garden. For the first time, she felt a flicker of unease that wasn't excitement. Being entangled in mystery was one thing. Being framed for it was quite another. Charles rang that evening. "Well, celebrity suits you. Local sleuth implicated in railway murder. I must say, it has a ring to it." "Don't start," she said, though she smiled despite herself. "You're certain you never had a ticket?" "Positive." "Then someone's having you on. You're being drawn into their game." "Then I'll just have to play better," she said grimly. Outside, the evening settled into long amber streaks. The village, so peaceful on the surface, seemed to hum with secrets underneath, like the low vibration of a train passing unseen in the dark. Agatha poured herself a small sherry, raised it to no one in particular, and murmured, "Here's to whoever thinks they can outwit me." But as she turned out the lights, a faint unease lingered, the unsettling sense that for once the joke might not be hers to make. By the next afternoon, Agatha Raisin had decided that if she couldn't control the gossip, she could at least control the guest list. The drizzle had returned, a fine, insinuating mist that blurred the hedges and polished the cobblestones to a sullen sheen. Inside her cottage, however, the atmosphere crackled with determination and furniture polish. Fritz-like efficiency wasn't Agatha's natural state, but when her reputation was being questioned, she became a domestic whirlwind. The sitting room gleamed, scones smoked faintly on the coffee table, her best china glittered in defiance of anyone who might accuse her of impropriety or bad taste. "It's called reclaiming the narrative," she told Charles, who was sprawled on her sofa, watching her pace. "Most people reclaim the narrative with a press release, not a tea party," he observed. "Yes, well, I'm not most people." "That's certainly true," he said, smiling. She glared at him. "I've invited Lydia Brandt, Saskia Dunn, Roy Silver, and young Eddie Parr from the station. If any of them know something, they'll trip themselves up over cake. Food loosens tongues." "Or chokes them," said Charles, "depending on your baking. You can leave at any time. I wouldn't miss this for the world." The doorbell rang precisely at 4. Agatha smoothed her skirt, lifted her chin, and opened the door to find Lydia Brandt standing like a frostbitten orchid, beautiful, fragile, and faintly displeased by everything she saw. Mrs. Raisin, she said, voice wrapped in cashmere. I came only because I thought it might be diplomatic. Then you'll fit right in, said Agatha, ushering her inside. Moments later, Saskia Dunn arrived in a cloud of perfume and professionalism, followed by Roy Silver, who flung his arms wide. Darling Aggie, your cottage looks adorable, like a National Trust exhibit for mischief. Wipe your feet, said Agatha. Roy obeyed, grinning, as young Eddie Parr hovered in the doorway, cap twisting in his hands. He looked barely 20, all nerves and earnestness. Come in, dear, said Agatha more gently. You're among friends. If that's what we're calling it, murmured Charles. Tea was poured, scones divided, and pleasantries exchanged with the brittle civility of people attending the same scandal from opposing sides. Agatha took her seat at the head of the table, a general surveying her troops. It's dreadful business, said Lydia, taking delicate bites. First Clive missing, then poor Mr. Mott. I'm simply exhausted by grief. Grief tends to be less tiring when one's not guilty, Agatha remarked. Lydia blinked. Excuse me? Oh, nothing, Agatha said sweetly. Another scone? Roy coughed into his napkin to hide a laugh. Aggie's just teasing Mrs. Brandt. She loves an insinuation before dinner. You're not helping, Agatha hissed. Saskia set down her cup with a sigh. For what it's worth, I'm certain Mr. Brandt will turn up alive. He was resourceful. Agatha pounced. You knew him well, then? We had an understanding, Saskia said coolly. A professional one. He wanted my advice about certain land parcels near the old siding. He said there were ownership complications. Of course, I thought nothing of it. Charles leaned back. An understanding sounds rather flexible. Saskia's smile didn't reach her eyes, only to the cynical. Eddie Parr, who had been staring miserably at his plate, suddenly blurted, Mr. Brandt wasn't a bad man. He just got in over his head, that's all. All eyes turned to him. Colour rose in his cheeks. Go on, said Agatha softly. He said he was keeping something safe in the old waiting-room vault. Told me never to mention it. Said it was evidence. I thought he meant society records, but maybe it was something else. What kind of something else? I don't know. I never looked, honest. You didn't ask? Eddie fidgeted. I didn't want to get sacked. He was the boss, wasn't he? Agatha exchanged a glance with Charles. This at least was something new. Thank you, Eddie, she said kindly. You've been very helpful. Have I? He looked alarmed. Very. Lydia rose abruptly. I really must go. I find all this speculation distasteful. Not as distasteful as murder, I imagine, said Agatha. Good day, Mrs. Raisin. When the door closed behind her, Roy exhaled dramatically. Well, that was like having tea with an iceberg. Do you think she did it? I think she's hiding something, said Agatha. Then again, Charles mused, so are you, darling. Probably biscuits. Agatha ignored him. We're going to the station. If that vault exists, I want to see it. Roy widened his eyes. You mean now? At dusk? How cinematic. Bring your coat, she said briskly. They reached the deserted platform half an hour later. The air smelled of wet iron and nostalgia. The waiting room's peeling door gave way under Agatha's determined push, revealing dust, cobwebs, and an ancient safe in the corner. There it is, she breathed. Charles ran a finger over the lock. It hasn't been opened in years. Stand aside. Agatha knelt, wielding a hairpin with more confidence than skill. Do you even know what you're doing? No, but I've seen enough films to fake it. After several attempts and a muttered curse or two, the handle gave a reluctant click. Inside lay an envelope yellowed with age. Agatha pulled it out triumphantly and tore it open. Stock certificates, she said, disappointed, and torn ones at that. Charles peered over her shoulder. Forgery, I'd say. Probably a financial scandal. Perhaps Clive was blackmailing someone. Or being blackmailed, said Agatha. She sniffed the paper, an odd mixture of mildew and old ink. Hardly worth murder, though. Roy, clutching his phone for dramatic effect, took a picture. Look at us, urban archaeologists. Agatha Raisin and the curse of the Cotswold bonds. Put that thing away, she snapped. This is evidence. Of what? Asked Charles. That Clive Brandt liked antiques. Of motive, said Agatha. But even as she spoke, her confidence wavered. Something about the paper seemed wrong. Too fragile, too faded. Later, over tea again at her cottage, Mrs. Bloxby arrived, bringing calm like a balm. She examined the certificates with mild curiosity. These are very old, she said. Look, the ink has bled into the fibres. It's at least 30 years out of date, and this watermark stopped being used in the 70s. Agatha frowned. So they're worthless. I'm afraid so. Charles raised a brow. Red herring, I'd say. Fish metaphors don't suit you, said Agatha, though she smiled faintly. Roy, sprawled on the sofa, checked his messages. Well, the internet's already saying you found vital evidence. You're trending on local social media. Oh, marvellous, said Agatha. Fame without fortune, my favourite kind. Mrs. Bloxby regarded her kindly. You do realise you're getting rather too involved again? I can't help it, said Agatha. Every time I try to sit still, someone else tells a lie, and I can't abide lies. Perhaps you dislike being left out of the truth more, said Mrs. Bloxby gently. Agatha's indignation softened into thought. Maybe, she admitted. The telephone rang, slicing through the cosy quiet. Agatha snatched it up. Raisin. Bill Wong's voice was brisk. We've got the forensics from Mott's boots. Traces of coal dust, but not from the station. From a private siding outside Mirabel, closed since 1958. Agatha straightened. Closed, but not deserted. Apparently someone's been there recently. Thought you'd like to know. You thought right, she said, excitement returning like caffeine. Agatha, do not go near that siding, he warned. Of course not, she said automatically, before the rain sets in. As she hung up, Charles groaned. You're thinking about it, aren't you? Thinking, she said. I'm already halfway packed. You'll get us both arrested. Nonsense, said Agatha, pouring herself more tea. I'll bring scones. No policeman arrests a woman holding baked goods. He studied her fondly. You know, Aggie, one day your curiosity will kill you. Then I'll die fashionable and well-informed. Outside, the rain eased, and through the mist the faint outline of the hills seemed to beckon. Somewhere beyond them waited an answer, perhaps grim, perhaps absurd, but irresistible all the same. The following afternoon, the rain had returned in earnest, that peculiarly British downpour that wasn't heavy enough to justify an umbrella, yet determined to soak everything in sight. Agatha Raisin, clad in what she optimistically called her field jacket, and what Charles described as a garment last fashionable during the Boer War, surveyed the bramble-choked path leading to the old railway siding. It's like something out of Wuthering Heights, said Charles, adjusting his collar, only with less romance and worse footwear. Stop grumbling, said Agatha, swiping at the nettles with a walking stick. Bill said the coal dust came from here, and we're going to find out why. Bill said not to come here, Charles reminded her. He says that about everywhere interesting. The path wound downward through wet grass and forgotten hedgerows until the overgrown siding appeared, half lost beneath ivy and decades of neglect. A warped sign still clung to the fence. Private property, closed 1958. Beyond it stretched two rusted lines of track that vanished into the trees. Hauntingly picturesque, murmured Charles, if one enjoys tetanus. Hush, said Agatha. Listen. The sound of rain on metal filled the air, but beneath it was something else, a faint creak, as though a door moved in the wind. Following the noise, they came upon a small corrugated shed hidden behind a collapsed signal post. Its padlock was long gone, the door hung half open. Agatha pushed it wider. The smell hit first, oil, damp wood, and something faintly metallic. Inside, a single dusty window let in a sliver of grey light. Old tools and scrap were scattered across the floor. Nothing here, said Charles, peering in. Agatha's eyes narrowed. Look again. Near the far wall stood a metal case, its once polished surface dulled with grime. She recognized it instantly, the same briefcase Clive Brant had carried at every historical society meeting, the one he'd theatrically set beside him, as if it contained the Magna Carta. Agatha's heart gave a quick, traitorous flutter. Charles, it's his. He stepped forward, crouched, and ran a gloved finger along the handle. You're right. Monogrammed CB, rather expensive taste for a local historian. Open it, she said, ladies first. You're impossible. Still she knelt, snapping the catches open. The lid creaked. Inside lay a few scattered papers and a small notebook, the edges singed as though half burnt, and on the handle, dark stains that weren't rust. Blood, said Charles quietly. Agatha swallowed. So he didn't run off after all. Or someone wanted us to think so. She lifted the notebook carefully. Across its pages were lists of donations to the Historical Society, small amounts, names neatly written in Brant's hand. But one page stood out. Saskia Dunn, £5,000, circled twice in red pencil. The next few lines had been torn away. "That's quite a donation for a woman who said she barely knew him," said Agatha. "Perhaps it was a business contribution," said Charles, "for tax evasion and social climbing. Or hush money. Aggie, must everything be sinister?" "Yes," she said simply. Thunder grumbled across the hills. The shed darkened as the rain thickened. Agatha turned toward the door and froze. A faint sound drifted through the downpour, a crunch of gravel, slow, deliberate. Charles heard it too. "We're not alone." "Don't be dramatic," she whispered. "Probably a badger." "That's an unusually stealthy badger." They stood very still, listening. The footsteps halted, then retreated, swallowed by the rain. Agatha exhaled, aware of her pulse hammering far louder than she liked to admit. "We should go," said Charles, "before the ghosts or the police arrive." "Not yet. I want that ledger." "Fine, but if I'm arrested for trespassing, I'm telling the papers it was your idea." "They'll already assume that." They slipped the notebook into a plastic carrier bag and made their way back through the undergrowth. By the time they reached the car, both were dripping, mud spattered, and in Agatha's case, privately exhilarated. "Well," she said, settling into the seat, "that's progress." "Progress toward pneumonia," Charles muttered, starting the engine. The drive back to Carsely was a blur of wet roads and windshield wipers. Agatha held the carrier bag on her lap like a trophy. "Don't you see," she said, "Saskia's name, the blood, the briefcase, it all ties together. She must have been funding something illicit. Or buying a plaque at the station. People do absurd things with spare cash." "You're impossible," she said again. "And you're magnificent," he replied. That silenced her, though she wasn't sure whether with pleasure or confusion. Back at the cottage, Agatha peeled off her soaked jacket and deposited the evidence on the kitchen table. Charles produced wine, declaring it medicinal. They toasted to trespass, mud, and mayhem, and for a few moments the tension lifted. "What will you tell Bill?" he asked. "Nothing yet. Let him catch up for once." "You do realize," said Charles, "that withholding evidence is technically a crime." "So is boredom," said Agatha. When he left just after 9, the rain had eased into a steady drizzle. Agatha tidied half-heartedly, poured another glass of wine, and stood staring out at the dark lane. The day had left her restless. Every instinct told her someone knew what she'd found, and wasn't pleased about it. A movement outside caught her eye. A figure, tall, coat collar up, was crossing her garden gate. She couldn't see the face, only the outline against the faint lamplight. "Probably Charles," she muttered. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't. Charles would have called out or more likely rung the bell to be irritatingly polite. The figure stooped, left something on her doorstep, and vanished into the mist. Agatha waited a moment, then opened the door cautiously. Rain hissed against the hedge. On the mat lay a small brown parcel, string-tied, glistening with moisture. Her stomach tightened. She picked it up, carried it inside, and placed it on the table. The string came loose easily. Inside, wrapped in old newspaper, was a vintage train whistle, brass, beautifully crafted, the sort that once signalled departures and emergencies alike. A folded note rested beside it. She unfolded it. "Mind the gap, Mrs. Raisin." Agatha stared. A chill ran through her despite the fire still burning low in the grate. She lifted the whistle. It was cold, heavier than it looked, and noticed faint smudges on the mouthpiece. Her heart gave a thump. Fingerprints. She placed it back in the wrapping, trying not to touch the metal. Someone wanted to rattle her, or frame her, or both. When the telephone rang, she nearly jumped out of her skin. "Raisin," she barked. Bill Wong's calm voice answered. "Aggie, it's me. Quick question. Charles Fraith came by the station earlier, didn't he?" "No," she said slowly. "Why?" "Because his fingerprints turned up on that spanner we found at the signal house." Agatha felt the floor tilt slightly. "That's absurd. He barely touched anything." "Except apparently the murder weapon," said Bill grimly. "He said he hadn't been near it, but forensics disagree. Can you confirm he didn't handle the spanner or anything on the work table that night?" "Of course not," she said hotly. "He was too busy criticizing my coat." "Then we've got a problem. Someone's using his prints. Keep an eye out for anything suspicious, will you?" "Define suspicious," she said, glancing at the whistle. "Anything you wouldn't normally find on your doorstep." "Too late," she murmured. "What?" "Nothing. Just take care, Bill. Someone's playing games." When she hung up, she sat at the table for a long moment, staring at the parcel. The whistle gleamed faintly in the firelight, innocent yet menacing. She reached for it once more, then stopped. The mouthpiece caught the light, and she saw them clearly this time, ridged impressions of fingerprints. She fetched a tissue and gently turned it over. Scratched into the brass, almost invisible, were initials, C.F. Charles Fraith. Her first instinct was anger, at whoever had planted it, and at fate for its perverse sense of humour. But beneath that simmered something softer, fear. Not just for Charles, but for herself. The killer wasn't merely clever, they were close enough to watch her window, to know her habits, to twist every discovery into a trap. She rapped the whistle again, tighter this time, as though the act itself could bind the danger. Then she poured one last inch of wine, swallowed it, and said aloud, to no one in particular, "Well, if they think they can frighten me, they clearly don't know Agatha Raisin." Her voice trembled only slightly, and she told herself it was from the cold. Outside, the rain softened to a whisper, and somewhere beyond the hills an old train whistle blew, a long, mournful sound that might have been wind. But Agatha, listening, wasn't entirely sure. Morning broke in a blaze of deceptive sunshine, the kind that promised spring but delivered paperwork. Agatha Raisin sat at her kitchen table, still glaring at the brass whistle sealed inside a plastic bag. Its innocent gleam mocked her. Across the room, Charles lounged by the window, irritatingly calm for a man whose fingerprints were now, apparently, decorating a murder weapon. "You'd think," Agatha said, stabbing her toast with a butter knife, "that if someone wanted to frame me, they'd at least do me the courtesy of being subtle." "Oh, but you do attract drama," said Charles lightly. "It's your natural perfume. You're very smug for a potential felon." "Innocent men always are," he said. "Besides, it gives me something in common with you. I'm being falsely accused too." Before Agatha could retort, her telephone rang. She snatched it up. "Mrs. Raisin," came Bill Wong's patient voice. "We need you both at the station." "Both?" "Charles is here. It's about those fingerprints." Agatha's heart gave a quick leap. Anger mostly, but threaded with worry. "Don't you dare say a word until I arrive," she told Charles. "Darling," he said, rising, "I never say a word unless it's inconvenient." Mirabel police station smelled of disinfectant, rain and bureaucracy. Agatha marched in like a general storming enemy ground. Bill met her in the corridor, his expression neutral in the way only long practice with Agatha could make it. "Where is he?" she demanded. "In interview room 2. "Calm down, Aggie. It's routine." "Nothing about me is routine," she said. He sighed. "Yes, I'm painfully aware." Inside, Charles was seated at the table, looking more amused than accused. "Ah, my saviour," he said, smiling up at her. "Don't start," said Agatha, taking the chair beside him. "Bill, this is absurd. He didn't touch the spanner." Bill raised an eyebrow. "Then how do you explain his fingerprints on the spanner we recovered at the signal house?" Agatha hesitated. "He's been to my house countless times. Perhaps he touched it ages ago." "The whistle's antique, but it wasn't in your house until yesterday," Charles interjected. "Look, it's very simple. I lent my gloves to Eddie Parr last week. He said he needed them for oil work on the train. If there are prints, they might have come from that. He's a nice lad. Bit impressionable, perhaps." Bill frowned. "Eddie Parr, the signalman? We've been trying to reach him. He didn't turn up for work this morning." Agatha stiffened. "He's vanished?" "Not officially. Yet." "You can't possibly suspect him," said Agatha. "He's barely old enough to shave." "People surprise you," said Bill quietly, "especially when frightened." Charles leaned back. "Well, if I were being framed, I'd be frightened too. Perhaps someone's decided Eddie makes a good scapegoat." "Or perhaps," said Bill, "Eddie's more involved than you think." Agatha bristled. "You're barking up the wrong hedge." "It's a line of inquiry, not a hedge," said Bill dryly. "Now, unless you have more to add." "I always have more to add," she said, rising, "and you'll thank me later." "That's what you said last time," he murmured. By afternoon, Carsely had become a circus. Roy Silver's handiwork, naturally. His exclusive exposé on the Daily Ripple blog featured a large photo of Agatha standing outside the signal house, taken without permission, under the headline, Cotswold's own Miss Marple, Agatha Raisin and the Railway Murder Mystery. "I'll strangle him," Agatha said, slamming her laptop shut. "You can't buy publicity like this," said Charles, reading over her shoulder. "That's because no one wants it." Roy himself phoned minutes later, voice bubbling with excitement. "Aggie, you're trending. #railway sleuth. You're practically an influencer." "I don't want to be an influencer," she snapped. "I want to find a murderer." "Darling, you can do both." "Roy, delete it." "Too late," he said cheerfully. "The BBC's already called. They're sniffing around for a human interest angle. Don't worry, I gave them your best side." "Which one's that?" she hissed. "The one holding a sherry glass." She hung up and groaned. Outside, 2 curious villagers loitered near her hedge. One held a phone aloft, pretending to photograph the roses. "They're taking selfies," she muttered, "with my house in the background." "You'll need velvet ropes next," said Charles. When Bill stopped by that evening, his patience was stretched thin. "Do you have any idea," he said, "how much harder it is to run an investigation when the main witness has her own fan club?" "Not my fault," said Agatha. "I didn't ask for fame." "You didn't not ask either," said Bill. "Half the village thinks you're solving the case. The other half thinks you're the killer." "At least they're engaged," she said brightly. He stared at her. "This isn't community theatre, Aggie. Eddie Parr's still missing. His parents are worried sick." Her tone softened. "Do you think he's in danger?" "I think he's connected," said Bill, "and I think someone's pulling strings." Agatha poured him tea. "Then let's pull harder." "You're not officially on this case." "I'm unofficially indispensable," she said. Charles, lounging on the sofa, raised his cup in salute. "Here, here," Bill sighed. "Fine. Tell me what you've deduced." "Time," said Agatha crisply. "Everything hinges on timing. The Paddington ticket, the last train, the dead historian. It's all about minutes." Bill gestured for her to continue. "The Paddington ticket was bought at 7, she said, ticking points on her fingers. Mott was killed before 8, say 1:45. The train rolled back empty at 8:40, so whoever killed him used the train somehow, either to move the body or to make us think it moved." Bill considered. "Possible. The autopsy suggests Mott was struck elsewhere and dragged to the signal house." "Then the killer had transport," said Agatha. "And since the train was already running—" "They used it," Bill finished. "Exactly. Someone boarded that last train, killed Mott or Brandt, and left the carriage before it returned." Charles tapped his chin. "But how? You can't just leap off a moving train without consequences." "Unless it slowed at the curve near Mirabel's bridge," said Agatha. "Old lines always have one." Bill gave her a long look. "You've been reading police reports again, haven't you?" "Just the bits Roy leaked online," she said innocently. He groaned. Before she could elaborate, her phone buzzed. Roy again. "Aggie, darling, marvellous news," he trilled. "Someone just sent me a video from the Mirabel Crossing, grainy CCTV from the night of the disappearance. You're going to love this." "Roy, this isn't a film premiere." "Oh, but it might as well be. There's a figure on it, female, mid-height, waving as the last train passes. And get this, she's wearing a lilac coat. Lilac, the exact colour you said Mrs. Brandt favours." Agatha's pulse jumped. "Send it to me. Now." Moments later, the clip arrived. The footage was grainy, monochrome, but clear enough to show the outline of a woman standing by the tracks, arm raised in what might have been a wave or a signal. "There," said Agatha, turning the screen to Bill. "What did I tell you?" Bill studied it carefully. "Could be anyone. Quality's too poor to confirm identity." "Nonsense," she said. "Look at the posture. Lydia Brandt's spine has that same aristocratic stiffness, like she's perpetually bracing for applause." "And yet," said Charles quietly, "what would she be doing waving a train through at that hour? Unless she wanted someone to think she was somewhere else." "Or unless she was seeing someone off," said Agatha. "Her husband?" asked Bill. "Or his killer," said Agatha. The words hung in the air. Bill exhaled. "All right, I'll request the original footage for analysis. But until we know more, don't go confronting anyone, promise me." "I never confront," said Agatha. He stared at her. "Fine," she said. "I rarely confront. Just try to stay out of headlines for one night." After he left, Agatha poured herself a sherry, mood caught between triumph and dread. Outside, the streetlights glowed faintly against the rain. Somewhere, cameras might still be flashing, villagers still whispering, Roy still typing. She couldn't shake the feeling that every clue she found led her closer, not just to the truth, but to danger dressed as admiration. "You enjoy this too much," said Charles, watching her from the armchair. "Enjoyment has nothing to do with it," she said. "It's duty." "You mean ego?" "Same thing," she said. He laughed softly. "You know, you'd make a dreadful monk." "Thank heavens," she said. "Now pour me another." As she raised her glass, her gaze drifted back to the computer screen, where the paused CCTV image glowed in monochrome silence. The woman in lilac, alone at the crossing, one hand lifted in farewell or warning. Agatha studied it for a long moment, the sherry warming her fingers, unease curling through her like smoke. "Lilac," she murmured. "It's always lilac." And outside, as if the past were repeating itself, the faint sound of a train whistle echoed through the night, lonely, low, and unmistakably real. A pale morning mist draped itself over Carsely, the sort that made the village seem like a postcard left out in the rain. Agatha Raisin sat at her kitchen table, nursing her second cup of coffee and contemplating the increasingly irritating fact that Lydia Brandt had yet to return any of her calls. "She's avoiding me," Agatha muttered. "Can you blame her?" said Charles, who had appeared with his usual unearned serenity, dressed impeccably for a man who had nothing pressing to do. "You've publicly accused her of murder. Twice." "I did not accuse," said Agatha, standing. "I implied, and that's a crucial difference." "To a jury, perhaps not." "Oh, stop. She's hiding something, and I'm going to find out what. If she won't talk to me on the phone, I'll go to her house." "Aggie, barging into someone's home uninvited is not investigation. It's burglary with a social veneer." "Then consider me socially veneered." Lydia Brandt's cottage, a whitewashed beauty perched just outside Mirabel, was the sort of place that gave property agents palpitations. Agatha strode up the gravel path, ignoring the tinkling wind chimes that somehow managed to sound judgmental. She rapped sharply on the brass knocker. After a moment, Lydia herself opened the door, swathed in a lavender dressing gown that matched the faint bruised tint beneath her eyes. "Mrs. Raisin," she said coolly, "I'm surprised you have the nerve." "And I'm surprised you have the time for theatrics," said Agatha. "May I come in?" Lydia hesitated, then, perhaps deciding that refusing would look worse, stepped aside. The sitting room smelled faintly of lilac and expensive misery. Agatha took in the tasteful furniture, the half-empty sherry glass on the mantel, and the pile of unopened post. Lydia perched on the edge of a chair, brittle as porcelain. "You're persistent," Lydia said. "I'm thorough," said Agatha. "Bill Wong will be here soon, and before he starts throwing around words like motive and alibi, I thought I'd give you a chance to tell me what really happened that night." "You think I killed my husband?" "No," said Agatha, surprising herself. "I think you cared more than you want anyone to believe." Lydia's eyes flickered. Pain, perhaps, or pride. She sighed, the defences loosening just a fraction. "All right," she said quietly. "You're half right. I did meet him that night, at the station." Agatha leaned forward. "Go on." "He phoned around 6, said he needed to see me before the final run. He sounded nervous, distracted. I told him it was ridiculous, that the weather was dreadful, that he should come home, but he insisted, so I went." "And?" Lydia clasped her hands tightly. "He was already there when I arrived, waiting by the guard's van. He had his briefcase and a suitcase, said he was leaving, running off with Saskia Dunn." Her voice caught, though she forced a brittle laugh. "Imagine, running away with an estate agent." "He told you that outright?" "Yes. He said he'd been transferring money from the Historical Society's account for months, that she knew people who could help him start again. He looked wild, like a man who'd decided shame was for lesser mortals. I was furious. I said things. So did he." "What sort of things?" "Ugly ones," Lydia admitted. "He accused me of being jealous of his work, said I never supported him. I told him he was a fraud. Then I took the lantern from the platform and waved it at him like some melodramatic fool. I wanted to scare him, to make him see sense. I swear I never touched him." Agatha's sharp eyes softened. For once, Lydia sounded almost human, less a society matron, More a woman blindsided by betrayal. So you left? Yes. He was alive when I walked away. The train was already warming up to depart. I heard it pull out, with the whistle blowing. Agatha frowned. You're certain? Positive. It echoed down the line. I'll never forget it. Strange, said Agatha, because every witness swears they didn't hear a whistle at all. Lydia looked startled. Then they weren't listening. Or, said Agatha quietly, perhaps the whistle wasn't there to blow. Later that afternoon, Agatha met Bill at the Red Lion, where the gossip was marinating nicely. The usual suspects, Trevor's widow, the postmistress, two women who'd attended yoga once in 1998, watched her approach with unabashed curiosity. Bill looked tired, his patience clearly frayed by equal parts paperwork and Agatha Raisin. You spoke to Lydia, he said, sitting opposite her in a booth. Yes, she admitted meeting him, claims he was alive when she left. That fits what we've got, said Bill. Train driver remembers seeing a woman in a lilac coat near the guard's van about 6:30. Matches her story. Except, said Agatha, lowering her voice, she says the train left with the whistle blowing. Bill frowned. We recovered the whistle. It wasn't attached. The thing was missing entirely. Until it turned up on my doorstep, said Agatha. His eyes widened. You mean that's the same whistle? The very one. Bill sat back, exhaling. Then someone planted it after the fact. To spook you, or to tie you in. Or both, said Agatha. But think about it, Bill. If Lydia heard a whistle when there wasn't one attached, what did she hear? A hand whistle. If the main one was detached, someone could have used a pocket whistle to fake the signal. A recording? An echo? Or someone else, someone on that train, used another whistle to make it sound as if everything was normal. Bill rubbed his chin. You think the killer rode the train? I think the killer used it, said Agatha. Mott's death, Clive's disappearance, the timings, they all point to movement. The train wasn't just a backdrop, it was a weapon. That's quite a theory, said Bill. You love my theories, she said. I tolerate them, he replied. Agatha sipped her sherry. You'll see. Whoever did this got on at Mirabel Crossing and got off before it coasted back, which means they knew the line intimately, every bend, every signal. Eddie Parr, said Bill slowly. Agatha's eyebrows shot up. No, he's missing, not murderous. Or both. He worked the line, had access to everything. If someone wanted to stage a death and hide a body, they'd need help from the inside. That's too tidy, said Agatha. Life's messier. Look at me. Point taken, said Bill dryly. That evening, Agatha found herself pacing her living room, replaying Lydia's confession in her mind. She could almost see the scene, the angry wife, the self-satisfied husband, the last steam engine chugging into the mist. But something didn't fit. Charles arrived, carrying wine and a look of mild mischief. You're brooding, he said. It doesn't suit you. Makes you look sincere. Don't start. Lydia admitted meeting him, said he planned to run off with Saskia and the society's money. Romantic and felonious, said Charles. How very British. Except she swears she heard the whistle blow as the train left. And it didn't? No, it was missing entirely. Bill confirmed it. Charles poured her a glass. So, what does that mean, oh great sleuth? Agatha took a sip, thinking. It means she's lying or mistaken, but she's too careful to get details like that wrong. So if she heard a whistle, there must have been one. Perhaps the killer had it, said Charles. Exactly. The killer was there, Charles, on that train. They stepped off at the Mirabel curve before it rolled back empty. You make it sound terribly cinematic. It is, said Agatha. Picture it. Darkness, steam, a single lantern, the hiss of brakes. The murderer climbs down unseen. Everyone assumes the train's empty, but it's carrying its secret all the way back. Charles regarded her with a mixture of admiration and concern. You realize you're narrating your own obituary? Don't be dramatic, she said, though her skin prickled at the thought. So who then? He pressed. Agatha stared into her glass. Someone with access, knowledge, opportunity, and enough nerve to leave me that whistle like a calling card. Meaning? Meaning, she said grimly. The killer isn't done yet. By 11 that evening, she paused by the window. The village lay quiet under the silver wash of moonlight. Far in the distance, a train horn echoed faintly, long, low, and eerie. She closed the curtains quickly, muttering, Imagination, just imagination. But even as she turned away, a flicker of movement caught her eye, a glint of lilac fabric vanishing into the shadows beyond her hedge. For one suspended heartbeat, she froze. Then, gathering her courage and her dressing gown, she snatched up the telephone and dialed Bill's number. "Bill, it's me. You'd better get to Mirabel Crossing. I think our ghost train has company." By 10 that evening, the entire Cotswold police force, and by unfortunate extension most of Carsely, had assembled at Mirabel Crossing for what Agatha Raisin grandly termed a reconstruction of events. To everyone else, it looked suspiciously like an outdoor fete with poor catering. Lanterns flickered along the platform, their glow competing with the blue flash of police torches. Reporters milled about, villagers carried thermoses, and someone had brought folding chairs. The drizzle had returned with theatrical timing, stippling umbrellas and turning the gravel into a glittering mess. "It's like Guy Fawkes' night without the bonfire," muttered Bill Wong, eyeing the crowd. "Only you could turn a murder investigation into a community outing." "If you want cooperation," said Agatha, tightening her scarf, "you must appeal to people's baser instincts, curiosity and snacks." "You mean vanity," said Charles, appearing with 2 paper cups of tea. "That too," she said, taking one. "Did you see Mrs. Joseph's? She's wearing sequins at a crime scene." "They sparkle under police lighting," said Charles, "very practical." Roy Silver was live-streaming the whole affair, narrating breathlessly to an invisible audience. "Here we are, darlings, at the infamous Mirabel Crossing. Our very own Agatha Raisin, the railway sleuth herself, orchestrating tonight's thrilling experiment." "If you don't stop that," hissed Agatha, "I'll orchestrate your funeral next." Bill cleared his throat. "Let's get this circus moving. The plan is simple. We'll reenact the last journey. The train departs, follows the original route, and stops at the same times. Miss Raisin will ride along purely as an observer." "Naturally," said Agatha, though her tone suggested otherwise. The small heritage locomotive, its brass fittings polished for the occasion, sat puffing quietly on the line. The driver, an elderly volunteer named Derek, looked both proud and mildly terrified to be part of a potential homicide reenactment. "You're sure this is wise?" murmured Charles as they climbed aboard. "Of course not," said Agatha. "That's what makes it interesting." The whistle blew, an authentic one this time, and the train chugged forward into the night. Inside the carriage, the air smelled of coal smoke and damp wool. Agatha settled herself on a wooden bench, notebook in hand. Charles leaned beside the window, while Bill stood near the guard's van, pretending not to look seasick. Outside, the fields rolled past in shadowy streaks. Lanterns from the watching villagers dotted the horizon like misplaced stars. The rhythmic clack of wheels filled the silence between them. "So, remind me," said Charles, "what exactly are we hoping to find?" "Patterns," said Agatha. "Timing. Anything the killer might have used. People miss details because they expect the extraordinary. Murderers rely on that." "And what are you expecting?" "Something ordinary," she said. "That's what always hides the truth." Bill checked his watch. "We're approaching the bend where the train slowed last time. That's where it began to roll back unmanned." Agatha rose, steadying herself against the motion. The night pressed against the windows, dense, wet, and strangely alive. "There," she said suddenly, pointing. "That hut. See it?" Charles squinted. Beside the track, half hidden by nettles, a squat structure hunched in the darkness. Faint lamplight flickered from within. "Maintenance hut," said Bill. "We checked it days ago. Empty." "Then someone's redecorated," said Agatha. Without waiting for permission, she pulled the emergency cord. The train lurched to a stop with a protesting hiss. "Aggie," shouted Bill, "you can't just—" "Oh, hush," she said, leaping down onto the gravel. "You wanted a reconstruction. Well, here we are." Charles followed with an exasperated sigh. "One day you'll pull a cord and summon actual doom." "Probably," said Agatha. "Come on." They approached the hut cautiously. Up close, it looked even more decrepit. Timbers warped, door hanging askew, the faint smell of oil seeping from the cracks. Agatha pushed it open, heart thudding. Inside, the single lantern flickered weakly over a clutter of tools, old crates, and— "Good heavens," she whispered. Curled in the corner was Eddie Parr. The young signalman looked pale, filthy and terrified. His hands shook as he clutched something close to his chest. "Eddie!" cried Agatha. "You gave us half a heart attack." He blinked up at her, wild-eyed. "I didn't do it, Mrs. Raisin. I swear on my mum I didn't." Bill stepped forward. Easy now. Nobody's accusing you yet." "You don't understand," Eddie said, voice cracking. "I only wanted to help." Agatha crouched beside him, softening her tone. "Tell us, love. Help us understand." He opened his trembling hands. Resting there, grimy and worn, was Clive Brant's wallet. Bill exhaled sharply. "Where did you get that?" Eddie's lips trembled. "From him. From what was left of him. I found him by the siding that night. I'd gone to check the signal relay. I thought he was asleep at first, but—" He broke off, swallowing hard. "Then I saw the blood." Agatha felt the air thin around them. "And the briefcase?" "I panicked," said Eddie. "He had it beside him. I thought if the police found me there, they'd think I did it. So I hid it, in the signal house. Then, when everyone started talking, I didn't know what to do. I tried to run, but—" "You came here," said Agatha gently. He nodded miserably. "I didn't mean any harm. I didn't kill him." Bill crouched beside them. "You've made a mess of things, son, but at least now we can clear your name. You understand you'll need to make a full statement?" Eddie nodded again, eyes brimming. "Come on," said Bill, helping him to his feet. "Let's get you out of here before you freeze." Agatha remained a moment longer, scanning the hut. Something about the scene tugged at her attention, a faint glint beneath the boards where Eddie had been sitting. "Hold on," she said. "What's that?" She knelt, prizing up a loose plank with Charles's reluctant assistance. Beneath lay a second lantern, newer, polished brass, and on its base, a stamp, "Property of Saskia Dunn Lutted." Agatha's pulse quickened. "Well, well, our glamorous estate agent again." Charles peered over her shoulder. "I didn't know property agents issued their own lighting equipment. Must be for late-night commissions." "Or clandestine rendezvous," said Agatha. "This isn't coincidence, Charles, it's choreography." Bill reappeared at the doorway, Eddie bundled in a blanket. "What's that you've got?" Agatha held up the lantern. "A clue, or a confession. Take your pick." He examined it, eyebrows knitting. "We'll run prints, but why hide it?" "Because whoever used it came here before," said Agatha. "They knew the hut, the line, the timings. They didn't just stumble on the perfect crime, they rehearsed it." "Meaning Saskia?" "Meaning she's more involved than she's letting on." Bill's jaw tightened. "All right, I'll have her brought in tomorrow." "Tonight," said Agatha firmly. "She won't sleep well once she realizes the net's closing." "And you?" Agatha smiled faintly. "I never sleep well when I'm right." By the time they reached the station again, the crowd had doubled. News of Eddie's discovery spread faster than the flu. Villagers clustered in excited knots, speculating loudly. "They've caught him," someone shouted. No, she did it. The estate agent, the glamorous one. Always the glamorous ones." Agatha ignored them, brushing raindrops from her coat. Roy was still broadcasting, face glowing in the torchlight. "Breaking update, my loves. Young Eddie Parr found alive in a shocking twist." Agatha marched over and yanked his phone down. "End it, Roy, before I end you," he pouted. "Aggie, the public has a right to know." "The public has the right to silence until I've had dinner," she said. Charles laughed quietly. "You're becoming rather good at this celebrity sleuth thing." "Don't," she warned. Bill emerged from the signal office, expression a mix of fatigue and reluctant admiration. "Well, congratulations, Aggie. You've managed to exonerate Charles, locate our missing signalman, and implicate half the county. Efficient, isn't it?" "Infuriating," said Bill, "but efficient." "You'll thank me later." "You always say that," he said. Agatha smiled. "And I'm usually right." Hours later, back in her cottage, Agatha sat by the fire with Charles, both nursing brandy and exhaustion. Rain beat softly at the windows, the sound oddly soothing after the chaos. "You know," said Charles, "most people spend their evenings watching television. You, on the other hand, restage train murders for entertainment." "It's called public service," said Agatha. "You thrive on it," he said affectionately. "All the danger and drama. It suits you." She looked into her glass. "I suppose it does. Still, sometimes I wonder if it's worth the cost." "Meaning?" "Every time I get close to someone, there's always a body between us." "Not tonight," said Charles. "Only a rescued boy and a clue." "A clue," she echoed softly, "and a lantern stamped with Saskia's name. Do you think she killed him?" Agatha shook her head. "If she did, she's smarter than I thought. But something tells me the truth's darker and pettier. It always is." Charles smiled faintly. You're a romantic cynic, Aggie. Contradiction keeps me young, she said. The fire popped, sending a brief shower of sparks up the chimney. Outside, a late train rumbled faintly across the hills, a sound both familiar and uneasy. Agatha stared into the flames, her mind already turning over possibilities, motives and lies wrapped neatly in lilac ribbon. You know, she murmured, half to herself, for all the noise, it's the quiet ones who do the worst damage. Charles raised his glass. To the quiet ones, then. To catching them, said Agatha, and beneath the comfort of the firelight, neither spoke of how close the killer still was, or how easily the next whistle might sound for them. Morning sunlight filtered weakly through Carsely's persistent drizzle, casting everything in a watery glow that made even the hedgerows look indecisive. Agatha Raisin, however, was not indecisive. She stood before the sleek glass doors of Dunn and Cumming estates, jaw set, umbrella dripping defiantly. "You're sure about this?" murmured Charles beside her. He looked dashing, infuriatingly so, in a dark overcoat that seemed to repel rain through sheer entitlement. "I'm sure I'm soaked," said Agatha, "and that Saskia Dunn has been lying through those perfectly veneered teeth since the moment she turned up. You do have a flair for confrontation, my dear." "It's called justice," said Agatha, pushing through the door, "and occasionally self-expression." The office was as aggressively modern as Saskia herself. Chrome fittings, white orchids, the faint smell of ambition disguised as air freshener. Behind the reception desk, Saskia stood poised in a lilac suit so immaculate it might have come with its own legal disclaimer. "Mrs. Raisin," she said smoothly, "and Lord Fraith. How unexpected. I'm afraid I've only a moment. I'm closing a rather important deal." "So are we," said Agatha. "Yours just involves handcuffs." Saskia blinked, the smile tightening. "Is this another of your theatrical interrogations? I do admire your creativity." "Save the estate agent charm," Agatha snapped. "We found your lantern at the siding, stamped with your company name. Care to explain why your property was left beside a murdered man?" Saskia's tone cooled. "Surely you don't imagine I wander the countryside misplacing lighting equipment?" "No," said Agatha. "I imagine you wander the countryside killing men who double-cross you." For a moment, silence settled between them. Then Saskia laughed, a low, cultured sound that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Mrs. Raisin," she said softly, "you've been watching too much television." "And you've been underestimating women with better instincts than patience," Agatha returned. Charles cleared his throat, diplomatic as ever. "Perhaps, Saskia, you'd care to tell us where you were the night of the last train. It might clear things up." "I've already told the police. At home, alone, dreadfully dull." "And yet," said Agatha, pacing slowly, "your fingerprints are all over a ledger we found with Clive Brandt's briefcase. £5,000 donated by you, circled twice in red. What were you buying exactly?" "I invested," said Saskia, lifting her chin. "Clive promised me the deeds to the old railway land once the society dissolved. It was a straightforward business arrangement." "Only he changed his mind," said Agatha. Saskia's mouth curved into something between amusement and bitterness. "He did. He said sentiment outweighed profit, that he couldn't part with heritage. I told him heritage doesn't pay staff salaries. He laughed at me, Mrs. Raisin, right there on the platform, said I'd never understand because I had no soul for history." "So you hit him with a spanner," said Agatha quietly. For the first time, the facade cracked. Saskia's composure trembled like glass under too much heat. "He deserved it," she said finally. "He taunted me, said the land wasn't mine to dream about, that he'd tell everyone I'd been embezzling from the society. Me!" I snapped. "One moment I was holding that cursed tool, the next." She stopped, drawing a shaky breath. Agatha's stomach turned, though her face remained calm. "You killed him." "I didn't mean to," Saskia said fiercely. "It was an accident. But once he fell, I realized what it would look like. So I thought, why not finish the story properly? I knew about the midnight run, the publicity stunt. I set the train rolling. Symbolic, poetic, don't you think? The last train from Mirabel Crossing, carrying its own ghost." "And framing Lydia Brandt for the pleasure of it," said Agatha. Saskia shrugged, eyes glittering. She made it easy. Her perfume was all over him already. They'd fought that night, I heard them. I left the train to drift back and planted a few details, just enough to keep the police occupied. Then, when When you began poking around, Mrs. Raisin, I admit I panicked. You're surprisingly competent for someone with such dreadful taste in shoes. I slipped a ticket marked AR under Mott, a little souvenir to send suspicion your way, Mrs. Raisin. Flattery won't save you, said Agatha. It wasn't flattery, said Saskia. Charles, sensing the air grow taut, took a small step back. Aggie, perhaps we should— No, said Agatha, her voice low. We finish this. You planted the whistle too, she said, at my door, to frighten me off. It seemed fitting, Saskia said, smiling faintly. After all, you love an audience, I gave you one. Pity you didn't realize you were the last passenger on my little performance. Your performance is over, came a new voice from the doorway. They turned. Bill Wong stood there, rain-soaked and grim, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. Behind him, Roy Silver beamed into his phone camera. Smile, everyone, Roy chirped. You're live on Silver Stream's exclusive confession Rural Crime Edition. Oh, for heaven's sake, groaned Agatha. Bill held up a small recorder. We've been here since you started talking, Miss Dunn. Every word's been recorded and streamed, apparently. Saskia's poise wavered for the first time. You can't. This isn't admissible. Oh, it will be, said Bill, especially since you've just detailed motive, means, and method in glorious stereo. Agatha folded her arms. And left your company lantern at the scene like a calling card, not your best branding move. Saskia's eyes darted wildly, calculating, but she saw the futility. With a final shuddering breath, she sank into her chair, mascara smudging faintly. He laughed at me, she whispered. That's all it took, just laughter. Agatha looked at her, really looked, and felt an unwelcome tug of sympathy. Pride and humiliation, greed and longing. They'd all driven Saskia to the edge. It wasn't evil, not exactly, just human weakness, dressed up in ambition. Take her away, Bill, she said quietly. As the officers led Saskia out, Roy sidled up, eyes gleaming. Aggie, darling, this is incredible content. The comments are exploding. You're practically a folk hero. Roy, she said, if you post one word of this before breakfast, you'll be the next unsolved mystery in Mirabel. Of course, he said, pocketing his phone, after one discreet selfie with the departing police. Charles gave a low whistle. Well, that was bracing. I must say, Aggie, you handle murderers rather well before lunch. It's a gift, she said. Later, back in her cottage, Agatha sat curled by the fire, sherry in hand. The day's events replayed in her mind like a grim pantomime. Saskia's confession, the shock in her own chest when fury turned to pity, and the faint thrill of triumph that followed. Bill arrived, dropping his raincoat over a chair. We've wrapped it up, he said. Saskia's in custody. Her fingerprints match those on the spanner and briefcase. Eddie Parr's cleared, Charles is cleared, and Lydia's composing an apology to the Daily Echo for her trauma. Good, said Agatha. Perhaps she'll donate to a victims fund. Unlikely, said Bill. She started a fund for wives wronged by railway enthusiasts. Agatha snorted. There's always a niche market. Bill smiled faintly. You did well, Aggie, though next time perhaps leave the live broadcast out of the interrogation. That was Roy's doing, she said. I merely provided the drama. You always do, he said affectionately, and you've earned some rest. When he left, Agatha lingered by the window. The rain had eased, leaving the fields silvered under dawn's pale light. She could just make out the railway line curling through the distance, a quiet thread of history once more at peace. Charles entered with 2 mugs of coffee. To victory, he said, handing her one. To persistence, she corrected. He studied her a moment. You look thoughtful. Regrets? Not quite, she said slowly. Just pity. Saskia wasn't so different from me once. Ambitious, lonely, too proud to be laughed at. You're nothing like her, he said gently. Don't be too sure, said Agatha. Give me a betrayal and a bad hair day, and I might have done the same. You'd never waste a good spanner, he said, smiling. She laughed despite herself. True, I'd aim higher. They sat in companionable silence as the fire crackled. Outside, the sky blushed faintly with the first light of morning. You know, said Charles, there's something rather poetic about it all. The last train, the last passenger, the last confession. Poetic, yes, said Agatha, but terribly inconvenient for the timetable. He chuckled and she smiled, but her gaze drifted back to the horizon. The mist was lifting, revealing the empty track stretching toward Mirabel Crossing. For a fleeting moment, she thought she saw something, a flicker of motion, the shimmer of steam. Then came a faint, faraway whistle, soft as memory. Charles followed her eyes. "Did you hear that?" "Probably the wind," said Agatha. "Probably," he echoed. But she wasn't entirely convinced. Some echoes, she thought, don't fade when the case is closed. They linger, half warning, half reminder, that vanity, greed, and loneliness always travel the same line, bound for the same quiet terminus. Agatha sipped her coffee, watching the light strengthen. Then she set the mug down, squared her shoulders, and said briskly, "Well, I suppose I'd better check Roy hasn't sold the film rights." "You never rest, do you?" "Not when people are lying," she said, "or posting." Charles laughed, and as his laughter mingled with the whisper of rain against glass, Agatha allowed herself one small, private smile. Justice, vanity, and the faint, haunting whistle of regret. Just another morning in Carsely. Spring sunlight had a way of making Carsely appear newly varnished, as if the village had been tidied up for visitors. The daffodils were exhausting themselves showing off, the cottages looked freshly washed, and even the post office cat had deigned to sun itself with an air of moral superiority. For Agatha Raisin, the calm felt vaguely suspicious. Peace, she thought, was all very well in moderation, but like low-fat yogurt, one could have too much of it. She stood at her kitchen window, hands on hips, surveying the neat patch of garden Fritz had bullied her into maintaining. The tulips were at that indecently smug stage of perfection that always made her feel personally affronted. Somewhere beyond the hedges, the villagers of Carsely were back to their natural state, gossiping with full vigour and partial accuracy. The murders, the trains, the lanterns, already they were dissolving into anecdote. Mrs. Bloxby had reported that the vicar's wife now used the phrase "mind the gap" whenever her sponge cake sank, and the Red Lion had begun selling a cocktail called The Last Passenger. Agatha should have felt triumphant. Instead, she was restless. The doorbell rang, sparing her from introspection. Mrs. Bloxby stood there, smiling serenely, holding a paper bag that exuded the comforting aroma of scones and diplomacy. "I thought you might fancy company," said the vicar's wife. "It's been rather a whirlwind week." "Oh, you know me," said Agatha, waving her in. "Whirlwinds are my natural climate." They settled at the kitchen table. Mrs. Bloxby poured tea with her usual grace, Agatha with her usual impatience. "You've done wonderfully, Agatha," Mrs. Bloxby said gently. "The village is quite proud of you, though half of them think you should have charged admission." Agatha smirked. "Maybe next time I'll sell tickets. Front row seats to murder and mayhem, cream tea included." Mrs. Bloxby regarded her with that mild, disarming smile that always seemed to see through the bravado. "You do realize, my dear, that you chase these things rather more eagerly than is sensible." "Someone has to," said Agatha briskly. "Otherwise they'd all be sitting about thinking crimes solve themselves." "Perhaps," said Mrs. Bloxby, "or perhaps you simply like being at the heart of it all." Agatha raised an eyebrow. "You make it sound indecent." "Not at all. Just human. Excitement can be a comfort when one feels," she paused delicately, "a little lonely." Agatha gave a sharp laugh. "Lonely? I've barely had a moment alone since this whole business began. Between Bill, Charles, Roy, and every nosy neighbour within a 5-mile radius, I've had more company than a royal wedding." "Yes," said Mrs. Bloxby softly, "but not all company is companionship." For a fleeting moment, Agatha's eyes flicked to the window, the empty path, the distant smoke from another cottage's fire, and then away again. "Don't go all pastoral psychologist on me, Bloxby. I'm perfectly fine. I just happen to prefer a little drama to knitting circles." "Of course," said Mrs. Bloxby, rising with her calm smile. "But humour me. Have some people over. Proper tea, conversation, laughter. It will do you good." "Very well," said Agatha, "but only to prove you wrong." By late afternoon, the kitchen was a small war zone of teacups, crumbs, and human contrasts. Bill sat by the window, his patience looking faintly frayed. Charles lounged against the counter, helping himself to biscuits he hadn't paid for, and Roy Silver dominated the room like an overexcited flamingo. "Darling, the story is everywhere," Roy exclaimed, gesturing with a scone as though signing a declaration. "Cotswold sleuth foils railway murderer. Honestly, the headlines practically write themselves. We could make a fortune." "We?" said Agatha. "Well, naturally, I'd ghostwrite your memoirs. We'll call it Murder on the Cotswold Line. You'd look marvellous on the cover. Something tasteful but assertive. Maybe holding a lantern, chin tilted towards destiny." "You're not getting my chin or my destiny," said Agatha. "I have my dignity." "Barely," murmured Charles. "Oh, hush," she said, swatting him with a napkin. "You're just jealous you won't get top billing." "Darling, he'll play the romantic interest in the adaptation," said Roy. "Think of it. Agatha Raisin, the fearless detective, played by someone glamorous, obviously, and Lord Fraith, her charming accomplice." "If they cast me, I want my own trailer," said Charles. "You'd want your own bar," said Agatha. Bill sighed. "Is this going to turn into another one of your projects? Because last time the village ended up in a talent show, and the police received 17 noise complaints." "No, Bill," said Agatha, pouring more tea. "This time I'm going to be entirely sensible." "You?" "Yes, me," she said, a touch defensively. "Then I give it 3 days," he said. As dusk fell, the gathering thinned. Roy left to chase a producer in Cheltenham. Bill went home to write his report, and Charles lingered only long enough to make an entirely unnecessary remark about Agatha's underappreciated charm before escaping into the evening. When the door finally closed, Agatha let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. The house felt suddenly very quiet. The ticking clock, the faint creak of the floorboards, the sigh of the wind against the panes, it all pressed gently around her, like a reminder that excitement was fleeting and solitude rather more consistent. She carried her cup to the window. Smoke curled lazily from her chimney, drifting upward like a ribbon of train steam against the darkening sky. For a moment, she imagined the soft chug of wheels, the echo of a whistle, the thrill of the unknown just beyond the bend. "Ridiculous," she murmured. "I'm supposed to be relaxing." But she smiled all the same. On the table lay the day's post, mostly bills and charity appeals. One envelope stood out, cream paper, elegantly embossed with the seal of the National Rail Museum. Agatha opened it idly, then blinked. "Dear Mrs. Raisin, we would be honoured if you would unveil our new exhibit, The Mystery of Mirabel Crossing, this Saturday. Press attendance expected. Period dress optional." Agatha laughed aloud, the sound half amusement, half delight. "Optional, is it?" she said to the empty room. "We'll see about that." Already her mind was racing. What to wear, what to say, which side was her best for photographs? Mrs. Bloxby's words echoed faintly, about loneliness and excitement, but Agatha dismissed them with a flick of the wrist. She wasn't lonely. She was legendary. Still, as she climbed the stairs, the faint sound of the wind outside carried an uncanny note, a low, wistful whistle that might have been nothing more than the breeze through the hedgerows, or something older, lingering, like memory. Agatha paused on the landing, listening. Then she smiled, a small, private, defiant smile, and said softly, "All aboard, Mrs. Raisin. There's always another journey." And with that, she turned off the light, content in the curious peace that comes from knowing life in Carsely would never, ever stay quiet for long.